Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome, everybody. This is Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm Chris Boyd here with Jeff Perry. We are of the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement Group, and glad to have you joining us. We've got a good topic today. A little surprising to me, Jeff, that we're talking about family planning.
I know. Well, you know, it's important. It's important to plan for your family.
But I don't think this is what people are thinking. When I think of that, I think in terms of something like it's about birth control or something. That's not what we're talking about.
Well, it's been in the news quite a bit, you know, the recent campaigns and the social issues that are out there. People see family planning and think, what are they going to talk about? What side are they on?
Yeah. So what we're talking about is financial planning for your family, estate planning, all the kind of planning that goes into thinking about maybe intergenerational wealth and the related issues. Is that what you want to talk about?
Okay, we can talk about that. That's fine.
All right, we'll do that instead.
I think we're both probably past we have families. We love our families.
I'm worried about these issues. Yeah.
No, not so much. It's interesting. This topic's been on our radar for a while. But Lisa and I, we just did some amendments to our estate plan. And I thought about this issue. You know, you're getting older. You start to think more about your estate plan, which is part of it, and your financial plan, which, you know, we've always kind of thought about. But you think about it as you get older, like when I pass and my executor or trustee, you know, how is all this going to happen? And I guess the general prudent advice out there, and we can dig into the details, is you should tell your family about what your finances are generally and the outline of your estate plan. Just we'll dig into this.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think
you agree with that generally?
I think generally it is a good practice. I understand there are instances where families have different concerns about family members' ability to handle money and whether they really want them to. Well, I think sometimes one of the challenges, Jeff, is if someone, maybe a degree of wealth.
Yeah.
If I've talked with business owners who would be like, you know, I'm not going to give it all to the kids. I don't want them to know they, are getting that much.
Kind of take away their motivation.
I don't want them to, yeah, exactly. I don't want them to stall out and think, well, I don't have to worry about it. You know.
Yeah, I'll ride the wave until.
That kind of notion, right? So sometimes I think that's part of why people are closer to the vest. Mm-hmm. Other times it may be that they feel like, oh, I wish there was more, and I'm a little bit, conscious of the,
right.
that my wealth isn't as much as I'd like it to be, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And so they feel like, there's not that much to talk about anyway. So I think these are sometimes inhibitors, right? But big picture, I think it is a good practice to talk about what are you planning in that case where someone has substantial money.
Yeah.
That business owner in the case I was scenario I was imagining, recalling. Well, it's still good to be clear what your expectations are. Because what if they're thinking they're coming into big money and they're not, better for them to know, that you've got your plan, whatever it is. I think sometimes too, in the case of like that, where there's philanthropy involved, mm-hmm. that's a value expression as well. And I think that's something you want to engage your family in and talk about the notion that, as part of our value system, we believe in helping our community, and here's how we're going to do it, or whatever it might be, right?
Yep.
Uh, to whom much is given, much is expected, that
Yep.
kind of notion.
Yep.
But that could be, when we talk about legacy, Jeff, we often think about it and talk about it in terms of financial terms, how we're leaving wealth to one or another, individual. When legacy can be other things too, it's values, it's stories, it's other things. So off track a little bit, but I think talking about these issues is important because it can help families to have a greater awareness of what's intended. And sometimes it can also be part of that process of clearly delineating value systems and things like that. When it comes to talking about what's intended, I think that's really important to have some clarity of here's what we have in mind for our plan. Like, let's talk about estate plan for a minute.
Okay.
Sometimes families, and I think we've talked about this on the show before, sometimes families just pick the oldest. Oh, they're going to be the one to settle my affairs.
Yep.
Well, that's not always the right person, but sometimes if that's what you're doing and why, and there's somebody else who's involved in your day to day and they're living right nearby, well, I think it's important to talk to them about and say, well, Johnny's the oldest or whatever.
It's almost like a pick that will not create strife because it's the expected pick, right?
Maybe so.
Right.
It may not be the best choice, and it might be worth
Correct.
talking about why that would or wouldn't be. But I think it also could help to alleviate tensions if parents elaborate on what they had in mind and why. A lot of times what happens when a passing of a parent is old tensions bubble up within the family.
Absolutely.
And
Mom
always did, dad always did, this kind of thing. You always were the, whatever, right? And by having some of these conversations with the family, you can kind of elaborate on your thinking and have it as an opportunity not to convey any kind of confusion around, hey, but I love each of you, that kind of thing. It's but let's talk about roles and who should do what kind of a consideration.
Yep. So this is really individual. We're talking about families generically. Sometimes there's one child, sometimes there's 10 children, sometimes there's businesses involved. And so let's just start with the conversation about a simple plan where it's a married couple. They have means, so they have assets, and they own a house and they have investments and IRAs, but there's nothing odd. I think we'll get into some of the oddities in a few minutes.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But there's no like unique circumstances. It's a standard 2 kids.
Yeah, let's keep it simple.
Yep. And so they have their financial plan and they have their estate plan. We'll start with the estate plan. And they're picking one to be the executor of their will or trustee of their successor trustee. They're picking a healthcare proxy and power of attorney. So they have these 3 kind of decisions to make.
So some of those are financial and some are health care.
That's correct. So the first one they're picking is the executor or personal representative or trustee who's going to handle the distribution of their assets when they both pass.
Right.
And
so that might be thought of like who's good at accounting, who's good at finances,
details,
maybe who's got some experience with handling money. You might think along those lines. Do you agree?
I definitely agree. And, sometimes they default to the older, and sometimes I've seen, including very recently, which has not turned out very well for this particular family sibling mix, where both were named.
Oh, yeah, that's tough.
That's right. So co-executors or co-trustees, and depending on the language of, we'll call it a trust or a will, but depending on the language of the document, it's likely that they both have to agree. And so I think that's the worst idea of anything we're going to talk
Yeah, I
about.
agree with you. As much as I get the thinking is that that'll be more collaborative. They'll both they'll have the chance to agree on things.
They can work
Nobody's being
together.
left behind. That
Right.
kind of mindset. It's not heavy-handed, but it does raise a greater potential for a contest of wills, right?
Yep.
No pun intended, but you know what I mean, with the notion that people might butt heads a little bit of no, it should be this, or no, it should be that. Okay, so pick one. Generally, is your
Pick one or go outside to a
you don't
non-child,
want it
right?
to be a family tension issue. Maybe a professional lawyer or whoever it might be
Yep.
could be a good choice in this case. So you talked about it in terms of passing one's death, right?
Yep.
But the trust or the power of attorney plays that role while you're alive.
If you become
It's
incapacitated,
an
especially.
incapacitated kind
Right.
of situation, and that could be relevant as well. Who's going to pay my bills? Who's going to be keeping everything, the ship running, so to speak?
Yep.
And this brings into the notion of not only the financial acumen, but also proximity. Who's going to be tuned in to my issues locally? Maybe could also be relevant.
Yep. Absolutely, it is relevant, and it's usually the same person. I think who is the executive person or representative in power of attorney. With not talking about the healthcare proxy, but I
Yeah.
think there's usually if you have, in our simple scenario, if you have two siblings, usually one of them is more organized, one of them is better with money, one of them is closer. Hopefully, all those things are the same
Yeah,
thing.
they may not all be the same, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So it's important, and it's really important to. This seems obvious, but I'm sure you've come across it before. We're talking about communicating with your family. Is after you and your spouse decide who these people should be, is you should talk to that person. You should give them a copy of the documents. You should explain. You should say,
Yeah, what's expected of them, and are they willing to do that?
right.
Yeah.
And so I'll just share something personal, which is in line with this. We just amended some documents. We changed a successor trustee on our trust. And so, giving this new successor trustee copies of the documents, explaining what our intent is in certain areas that, they're not ambiguous, but just adding some color, some detail,
Yeah.
and giving the successor trustee your name, for example, and the name of an attorney that they should go to for guidance. The name of all the beneficiaries is in the trust, but how about contact information of the beneficiaries? That's not typically in the documents. It may say Johnny Jones of Boston, Massachusetts, but do you have a phone number and an email for him or her?
Right.
And so, like, reviewing on the on from 10,000 feet, not every particular line, but reviewing your wishes and why you're doing things and what your intent is with your person that's going to carry out your wishes, either when you're incapacitated or you've passed, I think is super important.
I think that's a good point. So you kind of lay it out in front of them. Along those lines, do you want to transition to the healthcare considerations? I mean, I think that's just as important for some of that conversation.
It is.
And we talked a little bit about this not long ago when talking about a television show that we were watching.
The Pit.
The Pit. Yeah. Did you end up watching any of that or not?
We are current because they only release one a week. It's a good show, and in episodes 2 and 3, it carried over, maybe even to 4. Just for the listeners who weren't tuned into that podcast, is there is a person that has an
older man, and
I guess he's a parent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And near death, but
two siblings, a male and a female. the female is more assertive, we'll say, and they don't agree on the end of life and how it should happen.
And this whole two persons versus one,
right? There's another example of that.
For the healthcare proxy, I think it creates the potential for problems. We won't go into the particulars of that show again, but the concept of healthcare proxy is who's going to make decisions for me if I'm not able to.
Right.
And some jurisdictions prefer an agent, the healthcare proxy. Other jurisdictions prefer written directives,
living will type thing. Yeah.
Will. But both are that notion of what's intended. What do I want to see happen? And different people have different perspectives on this. Sometimes it's like, pull out all the stops, man. As my friend said, when you're dead, you're dead.
Gotta give them a chance, right?
Yeah. So that's one, and then the other is, well, if I'm at a certain age, maybe I think I've had a good life. I don't necessarily want to be on machines and prolonged indefinitely, and maybe if there's certain cognitive decline, you might not want to be having life extended just indefinitely,
right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
And so there may be some thoughts around what do I want, that and will someone adhere to your wishes? Will they know what you want and follow those wishes, which was at the heart of that episode.
Right. And so, just going off the episode, but this is real life type of stuff.
Yeah.
If you put in your healthcare proxy, your wishes, and, say you don't want extraordinary means used, you don't want to pull out all the stops, so to speak, which is one of the choices that people use commonly. I think it's a lot more powerful that if you have that discussion following, you've made this document, you've gone through that whole process, and you give a copy to your healthcare proxy. Hopefully it's one person and not two. An alternate is fine in case person number one's not available, right? Yeah. And you actually have the conversation with them that, yet I prepared this document. This is my wishes. I think it just magnifies the document, because without it, a healthcare proxy has this document and they're reading it, but in this emotional moment, and they're not really fully prepared to just, be the judge, if you will, and just go by the letter of the four corners of the document. They have so many other emotions and wondering if you really meant that. Did you understand it? But if you had told this person, this is my situation, this is my health, this is my decision, I want you to honor it, I think it would just be so much more powerful to the healthcare proxy, and so much more, I don't know how to say it, but it's a more of a gift to the healthcare proxy that you've had that conversation and you're relieving some of that burden from having to make that decision.
Yeah. You can see how this could lead to family tensions, can't you? How some of these challenging decisions and trying to fulfill someone's wishes could be challenging. So this goes back to what we started with, the conversations about this,
right?
The planning that goes into this, and as you were describing that and saying it's important to talk to the person who's going to take on that role. But let's say in that imaginary family of four, mom, dad, son, daughter.
Sure.
Right. It's actually important for mom and or dad to talk to not only the person who's going to be making the decisions, but also the person who's not, so that they also know those intentions, because they might be more inclined to be accommodating to them if they understand what's desired and why.
That's a great point. And, ideally that conversation happens with all four of those people in the room at the same time, right? So there's no like, Well, I don't know what you really said to the other sibling.
Yeah, you might have pressured, no sense
Right,
of like, oh, you were pressuring them or something like that, right?
right.
Perception.
I'm
Um,
in favor of all these family communications. I think they're important. I think it gets. I think though we're talking about the easy stuff so far.
yeah,
It's not easy, but the easier stuff. Um, I guess how far do you go though? I mean, that's where we get into the, you know, and the real special circumstances. So say you have this, just keep with our example. Let's say during the life of this family, the son in this case had some struggles along the way, so mom and dad helped him out. Maybe he was unemployed for a while, maybe he got a divorce, and there were times when he needed some extra funds. And whether or not the sister knows, this happened, right?
right. Yeah. How do you handle that in a way that's fair? Uh,
Equal is not always fair, or fair is
yeah,
not
we
always
we
equal.
we often like make reference to that.
Yep.
It can be that fair is equal,
Hmm.
but it's not always that fair is equal. Let's say in our hypothetical, uh, the daughter is highly successful professional,
Right.
financially secure, um, and well off,
Yep.
whereas Sonny's been struggling.
He's been bouncing around. Yep.
You know, so what's fair in that scenario? Equal might be fair, but there might be a sense of, well, I think Sonny needs a little bit more help, that kind of thing, so that, but maybe we'll keep it in a trust and
Hmm.
not necessarily give that money to Sonny to because he's not as good with money or whatever it might be, right?
So there's no right or wrong answer for mom and dad here. It's their money, their assets. They get to decide. But the tough part is, what do you communicate? Because if you,
You got to make sure you're saying something to daughter in that scenario that says, I love you, right? You
right,
know, but look how well you've done. We have total confidence you're fine.
hmm
You know what I mean? If they hear that, that's one thing, and they say, okay, therefore I'm doing something different than what might seem fair, equal. Um, or if they just find out at the reading of the will, what the hell? They might feel like they've been slighted somehow.
that in the daughter could very well feel less than, right,
Yeah,
without a
and
conversation.
more inclined to want to contest things,
Sure.
to say, wait a second, that's not right,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But if there's been some discussion and some disclosure, it may be different.
So some of these conversations are very difficult. We're encouraging these conversations, but we also know that sometimes people are not going to have these conversations because they just can't get there. They just can't emotionally get there or handle that
Yeah, I think
conversation.
don't you think in New England we tend to have a little bit of a different culture sometimes about money and discuss and openness about.
Much more private, conservative. Yes, I
Yeah,
do.
it's none of your business, kind of a mindset, and I think that's a very common uh, modus operandi, right?
Hmm.
That it's just I don't share that kind of thing with my kids. It's none of their business. I don't want them knowing. That's another thing to talk about, Jeff. Sometimes people get worried that the next generation is going to try to control things, take
Hmm.
over, or perhaps put them away, in a nursing home and take over their money and some of those fears that can evolve, right?
Absolutely.
How do you deal with that?
Well, you can deal with it by not naming your family as your trustee or power of attorney. Maybe you have a trusted friend or someone who's not a beneficiary. There is merit to having a non-beneficiary being the executor or trustee or power of attorney.
They
someone
usually
who's
do get some compensation for that.
yep. Reasonable compensation is usually, in the documents, and you can outline that greater if you want
But
to.
that can solve that
Mhm.
anxiety of like, oh, they're going to just want to grab my money and put me away, that kind of thing. Well, they're not interested. If they don't benefit, why would they do that?
Yep.
Right? If it's, that kind of thing.
And that non-family member can stand in if there's disputes and, be firm and without any emotion. Making business decisions are easier than making family decisions sometimes, right?
Yeah. Let's talk just related to this. Um, families that don't have kids.
Yep.
And now one spouse is left alone. And this is not that uncommon that
No.
the the family's gone, maybe the siblings are older or have died off,
Predeceased, sure.
uh, and then there's like, who am I going to talk to?
Hmm.
Who's going to be that person that could step in? Well, maybe there's nieces and nephews, but
But how
do they
committed
care
are they?
enough?
Yeah. How?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's a common and challenging. It's not an easy. I totally concede it is not an easy option to how do I handle this? Who do I turn to? There are professionals, as you were saying, but even there, like, are they going to care about my healthcare proxy? You
Probably not
know,
the healthcare proxy. They might do a decent job managing
my
your
money.
assets and paying your
Yeah,
bills, and
yeah.
that can be very prudent, especially if you're getting older and you start, you find yourself forgetting to pay something, or you're not
But
sure,
yeah, don't you want somebody watching over
right?
them,
Right.
right?
I'd rather have a professional. It's going to cost money, of course, but I'd rather have a professional doing that than asking a neighbor or, just some random friend, or quite frankly, a niece or nephew that I've seen 3 times in my life, right?
Yeah,
I think there's more
yeah.
opportunities for fraud and mismanagement there than paying a couple percent or whatever the fee would be to a professional. But the healthcare proxy is definitely one that you don't
It's a
see
challenge.
professional healthcare proxies out there
No,
for good
no.
reason, right? I mean, that shouldn't be a business.
No, I think it's challenging for sure. So in any case, there's not an easy answer on that. And then you're trying to think in terms of friends, and probably as who could be that. And the older you get, the more difficult that becomes, I think,
That's right.
to identify who will serve that function. Similarly, Jeff, maybe I don't know if this is stuff you wanted to talk about, but and I may be, going down a rabbit hole. But sometimes families have not only the issue with someone who's either not good with money, failure to launch whatever that kind of mindset
Yep.
is,
Yep.
or addictions or things
Sure.
that could complicate their a family's willingness or confidence that it makes sense to put them in charge of these resources that they might have available. And a trust is a good solution for that circumstance. But there are increasingly other circumstances. What if my kid has autism or is or something where they're on state
Special
aid
need.
or special
Yeah.
needs, maybe schizophrenia, and they're limited in their ability to hold down a job, or you can fill in the blank, right? You can picture different ailments or health considerations that have limitations on one's abilities, whether they're medical or mental health, kinds
Right.
of issues,
Right.
whatever it might be. Um, there's a variety of circumstances, or Down syndrome as an example. Someone can live a long life, but may have some degree of autonomy, but also may be benefiting from state benefits. And what does one do? They can't certainly necessarily fill the role of healthcare proxy in some of these instances, right?
Right. Right.
They may not be the person to be a trustee. In fact, it may be that we need to make plans for some of these people that outlives us, right? That, as a
Absolutely.
parent, we think that way, right? So just, I mean, there's all kinds of range of circumstances I kind of threw into one big jumble there, but let's talk about that for a minute or two too, because that is a whole other area of complexity in this family planning discussion that we're talking about here. What do you want to add to that part of the discussion?
I'll put those scenarios in two different buckets just to start. Bucket one is for individuals who, your beneficiaries, who should not receive a large sum of money or be managing it, right? For whatever reason. You mentioned some good ones, but it's not to their benefit. Might be to their benefit for one weekend, right? Where
Yeah.
they'd have a heck of a weekend. But
Yeah.
so
No, not real. But even that, right? Hazardous, right?
Right. And then the other bucket is for people who just don't have the ability to manage their own money, or that they might be subject to losing benefits or be taken advantage of financially by, a caregiver or something.
That's true. Some kind of.
But without doing a whole episode on it, this is where a good trust attorney really comes into play, because whatever the example is, whatever the concern is, whether it's you want to support a loved one who has a cognitive disability over the next 40 or 50 years, or you just don't want your beneficiary to get a lump sum of money, even if they're working, it's just not going to be healthy for them to do that. There's different trust provisions for each that can really accommodate your needs.
And when there are some circumstances like state benefits involved, there's particular kinds of trusts,
right,
that can be utilized to have discretionary resources to be available without disrupting state benefits. That's worth, again, like you say, the right kind of attorney. Yeah. But I think this also brings us back to the financial planning components of this, and thinking in terms of, in that case, we're not just planning for a couple to not outlive their resources, as an example, or an individual.
Right.
But now we're thinking about maybe multi-generational, like not running out of resources.
Yep.
And doing some planning that can forecast, how does that work? How do we make sure that we don't have an issue over, 2 generations of lifetime, if you will.
Right.
And sometimes that can involve just planning around how we manage the wealth. And other times it can have, thoughts around insurance planning, making sure we create more wealth with an insurance policy or something along those lines. I don't know. Anyway, there's the whole financial planning element. We spent a lot of time talking about the estate planning considerations of these kinds of discussions and conversations. I think we also need to talk a little bit about the financial implications, and this goes back to that question of how much do you want to reveal to your family about what you have, where you have it, how's it positioned, what kind of expenses are you incurring, do you have money in a safety deposit box, or valuables in a safety deposit box?
Boy,
do they have access to that?
That's right.
Do you have the little packet in the upper left-hand drawer where it's like when I die folder or whatever?
Open this.
Yeah, do they know where to find that? I had a conversation with my mom just the other day where she's like, "Hey, when I die, here's what I want my mass to be."
Sure.
It's got a game plan for the
very common that
I've got some music I'd like, and
my mother did the same thing. She picked out the songs. Absolutely.
Sing, this kind of. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So that can range, just like the estate plan. That can range from, there's an envelope here to, I'd also like to see people say, "Here's my attorney.
Yeah.
Here's my financial advisor." What, it's unique to everyone, but here are the people to contact to help you, right?
Yeah.
I want them to help you. And if you have a question, I want you to ask this person. This is my accountant. This is because you're going to need to do my taxes. All the things that you are worried about, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people worry about this. Let them know. Let your trustee, your executor, whatever term we're using here, know these things. So, and tell them as much as you're comfortable with. I, this line is movable for people, but you could at least tell them who your financial advisor is, your attorney, or your accountant, and perhaps have a meeting, in our example, with your financial advisor and go over some of your, maybe it's a setting that you can share some things that you haven't shared and some thoughts and desires that you haven't been able to share around the kitchen table. Maybe you can do it in the structure of a meeting with your financial advisor or attorney.
Yeah, that's good planning. Um, I I have a client who has a long letter that he updates periodically,
Right.
and from time to time he'll share it with me as to it's all of that, like talk to the attorney, here's the name and the phone number, talk to us, here's the phone number. um, I often think about other circumstances where what if something happened to one spouse, and it would be great if they could share, here's who I talked to about the taxes. Here's who I talked to about the mechanic, for the car.
Mhm.
Here's the guy who cleans the gutters. Whatever, right?
Whatever it is.
Some of those kind of mundane things that, well, if you need a handyman, here's who I'd call. Because I think a lot of times survivors take on stuff they're not familiar with, just in the chores and the stuff that we all split as in a household. You do
Right.
this and I'll do that. But what do I do? Who do I call? Yeah, that kind of thing.
And it's more complicated today. Probably like most people are using online bill paying, or
Yeah,
you get your bills actually online, the old days you get everything in the mail, so you just kind of wait it out, right?
yeah, and you'd know, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
because you'd get stuff. But if you don't have access to that email,
Right.
and things are happening automatically, you might see it on the bank statement. Again, if you have a bank
Well, if it's
statement
on
that's joint or in a trust or something, but if it's individual, what do you do then, right?
well, I had a neighbor who was married, her husband died, and she didn't have any children, back to that example, and he handled everything. So she did not have access to his email, and everything he did everything online. So she didn't even really know the banks, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's challenging. How'd you resolve that?
fortunately, she had tax returns, old
Well, she
tax
also
returns,
was fortunate she had you helping her out.
right? And ultimately, we found a nephew that was available to help and interested, and a
Yeah,
qualified person. So, but I'm just using that example. If you're not engaged, if you're the spouse that's not engaged and everything's online, or almost everything online,
yeah,
you know, it's more valuable than a phone number is what's the password, to at least where I can start, right?
yeah.
So
Well, Jeff,
a lot here.
I've told you the thing I always worry about with these is, suddenly there's things thrown across the room.
Oh, you mean the family meeting at
Yeah, the
Weg
family
Hyannis
the
office?
family meeting turns hostile or something.
Mhm.
No, just emotions can run deep on these things, and so that's one of those things that I think parents have to be prepared to elaborate. One, this is what I want, right? They've made a decision and it's their intention. But I think it's also important that they convey some of the emotion. Um, they have to be in a position where they're able to convey to their children, their adult children, um, their pride, their love, their all the things that they may need to hear a little bit to accept some of these things that otherwise might cause them to feel tension and stress.
Yep.
Um,
It's really a gift to have these meetings, and if you can't have the meeting, to have that letter that you talked about.
yeah,
That's really detailed and unique. In some ways, maybe both, but the key is to have that some type of communication and not just leave everybody guessing what your wishes are or what your finances are or what your plan was. I think it's a gift to your family to do those difficult things.
One of the best things you might do in this process is not only engage your family in the process, but engage your financial and attorney and accountant kind of professionals in the process, so that introductions, let your
Right.
family know who you deal with and they know who they can talk to, that everyone is introduced and has familiarity. Maybe there's also elements of helping in that process of walking through some of these things, and maybe that works out to maybe you explain to your financial advisor, I'd like you to walk them through a little bit about our plan, so they know, that kind of thing. You may want that done.
Yep.
And I think in that context, maybe some clarity around what kind of circumstance do we want to discuss. Not only just the current, hey, this is where we're at, but the eventualities of the what ifs. If I die first, if they die first, what do we expect to happen? What's going to be the process? If something happens, that there's a prolonged illness, how do we envision that being played out, and so forth? A little bit of the game plan of what we want to cover. Yeah. But sometimes a little bit of help in that process can be a buffer and also help to navigate some of that.
The structure of that can be a lot more effective than trying to get everyone around the kitchen table.
Yeah.
With the ball game on in the back and everybody's emotions on their sleeves and the dogs barking at the door, and the structure of a meeting in a professional setting with a plan of what is to be articulated and what's not.
Yeah, somewhat of an agenda, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
And the introductions have value. If you're a sibling or a child or beneficiary, it's going to be a lot easier to call you or call the attorney if you've met them and you have some understanding of what's going on, than just randomly trying to find out who was the financial advisor, where are the assets, who is the attorney.
Right. So with that, we covered a lot. Hopefully this is of some value to get started with your thinking about these issues. Definitely needs some thought before you start to execute, but give consideration, speak to an attorney about your estate plan, work with your financial advisor, and if you don't have someone in that role, we're happy to speak with you to see if we can be a resource in thinking about not only these issues, but also the overall planning around your financial plan and your portfolio design. Thanks everyone for joining us. Until next time, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901, or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.